Alright, in this video I'm going to be discussing the article by Willard Van Orman Quine, which is called Epistemology Naturalized. It's in this book. This is an anthology by Hume and Sosa called Epistemology. It's a great anthology of epistemological works. Epistemology Naturalized being one of them. A little earlier, maybe a month ago or so, I did a video on Quine's two dogmas of empiricism. That's probably his most famous paper. This comes in possibly equally or a close second, and I'm going to be discussing it today. So, if you remember that two dogmas of empiricism article, what he did there is he kind of did a bit of a rejection of reductionism and analyticity, and kind of did that via rejecting the notion of meaning altogether. So in this whole thing, he starts off by talking about how epistemology concerns itself with the foundations of mathematics, that of logic and set theory, and he's kind of does some referring to logicism, which is the theory of Frege and Russell and Carnap, that mathematics is reducible to logic and set theory. So, he kind of discusses that as sort of a prelude, but he kind of gets to the more important thing, which he says that in epistemology, or doing mathematics via logic and set theory, we have two projects. We have the conceptual project, and the doctrinal project. The conceptual project being about meaning, clarifying concepts, what we mean by saying certain things, defining them, a theory of concepts, and explaining. While the doctrinal project is about truth, figuring out what it means for something to be true, establishing laws by proving them. The theory of doctrine, justifying knowledge by truths of nature. Now, a lot of what this is doing proofs in this doctrinal project. It's about doing proofs and figuring out when something is true and when it isn't. And of course, as you know, there are many different kinds of theories of truths and kind of very many different theories of philosophy as to what it means for something to be true, and there are people who dispense with the notion of truth altogether. So, and I was going to do this upstairs on the board in my room upstairs. I have a marker board which I did my two dogmas video on, but it's freezing up there since it's winter, so I figured I would do it down here where there is heat. So, the question is, how is natural knowledge to be based on sense experience? So, I have a lot of videos on the logical positivist movement and about various articles through that period, and what the whole thing was of that, and what the whole motive was, what they wanted. Starting with people like Wittgenstein and Frege and Russell. Following that, we had a movement called the Vienna Circle movement, or the Vienna Circle, which is a group of scientists and philosophers who were trying to dispense with metaphysical talk and they were like a renewal of empiricism, where empiricism being that we only do philosophy and science by things we can verify through observation or verify empirically. So that, we had people like Moritz Schlick and Rudolf Carnap and Otto Neurath, Karl Hempel, and they were kind of following the genius Ludwig Wittgenstein and also Ernst Mach, and they kind of, following that, we had this, starting with that and following it, we had a movement which was called logical positivism. We had basically what we had there was what Quine calls reductionism, where they wanted to base all of our natural knowledge, all of knowledge itself, on sense experience or observation. And we had something called protocol sentences, and I have videos on that like crazy galore. I have two playlists. I have many playlists, but two playlists I want to mention here. Which one is called Epistemology, one is called Philosophy of Science. All of those videos that I've made are in there. So if you want more clarification of a certain thinker of this period, you can go there. Or if you think I've missed something, then let me know. So the whole thing here is that we had something which is called sense data, where if I look at this book, I see a certain black patch of a certain size and shape and color, size, shape, and color. Also, any kind of sensory data is called sense data. A feel of smoothness, or a certain smell, or certain taste, or any kind of sensory info. And the whole thing, they were foundationalists, and they wanted to make, they wanted to put the foundation of knowledge, they wanted to make observation or sense data the foundation of all of scientific natural knowledge. And the way of doing that was we had to translate. I talk about we have the thing language, which he does discuss here. The thing language. Oh, I have a black book. I have a book, and I have a glass, and I have microwave TV. All this stuff. I can talk about it in virtue of things, and then we also have the sensatum language, where we talk about black, square, patch, smooth, certain smell, smoothness of a table, taste of a certain drink. There are two different languages. Smoothness, whiteness, talking about everything in terms of that versus talking about them as things. I could walk around this table and think of it, oh, it's a table and chairs. Or I could think, squareness, smoothness, all these descriptors of what I'm seeing and feeling. I could even taste it and kind of just have this. I could talk about this table in just a continuation of discussions in the sensatum language, or I could just go back to the thing language and call it a table. But the whole thing was that they wanted to translate their thing language back to sensatum language in order to term by term, make observation the foundation of all knowledge. Carnap tried it first in his 1928 Aufbau der logische Aufbau der Welt, or the logical construction of the world. He did a term by term radical reductionism, where he wanted to translate term by term thing language back to sensatum language, and he did that. Tried that, but that failed. And then we had, and as Carnap went from 1928 to 1950, he kind of, and him along with Schlick, kind of slowly gave up on this radical reductionism, and they sort of, we can do it sentence by sentence. Now, that isn't working. We can do it a cash value translation via HIA. I have a video on that. So I wanted to give a little bit of a preface to this, because Quine in the 60s and in the 50s is, this whole article is a bit of a history of what has been going on in epistemology and philosophy of science before him. So he talks about Hume and says that Hume worked on the conceptual project, or the project about meaning. And he despaired about the doctrinal project. He worked on the conceptual project and figured out meanings and all that stuff, but he didn't. He had difficulty with the doctrinal project, and he couldn't. He tried to identify bodies with certain sense expressions. So he had all these things that he kind of really did well in the conceptual project. But Quine says that we today are not further in the doctrinal project than Hume got. So, granted, a lot of things have gone on in the conceptual project, but little has been done, or little progress has been made in the doctrinal project. So, this is a famous quote that's in this article. The Humean predicament is the human predicament, which is saying that no matter what meanings that we clarify, no matter what explanations we give, it's going to be very difficult to make the connection between natural knowledge and what we are observing, to make that doctrinal connection of truth between those things. No matter how much we do things conceptually, we will always have a difficulty with making a link between natural knowledge and observation. So he says there has been conceptual project progress. Bentham and Johnson did that via contextual definitions, or paraphrasis, where we have no need for objects or bodies, recognizing sentence as the primary vehicle of meaning. The conceptual project it uses contextual definition and auxiliary set theory. Radical reductionism, wrestling Carnaps. That's what they were doing. That's what they were. They were basically, what they were doing is they were doing a lot of stuff on the conceptual side, but they didn't really make that much progress on the doctrinal side. So about Carnap's Aufbau, der logische Aufbau der Welt. The goal was that if it was completed, it would allow concepts to be clarified and couched in observation. So this does not mean proof or justification or truth. It just means that any concept could be clarified because of this reductionism. So what is radical reductionism? And that's just like we are translating term by term from the thing language to the sensitive language, and that is what Carnap was doing in his Aufbau. Term by term, little by little, from the thing language to the sensitive language, translating in order to get that conceptual connection and hopefully get to a doctrinal connection as well. The whole thing of Carnap's radical reductionism in the Aufbau was take any sentence of the thing language and ultimately reduce it to a statement of observation. But this is all conceptual and not doctrinal. If this worked, it was expected that sensory evidence for the doctrinal project would be immediately available. So it was thought that if we were able to complete this, then we would have evidence to be able to work with for the doctrinal side. That if we succeeded on this side, we would be able to do well we would be able to make progress on the doctrinal side. When really that never really worked out. Let's see here. If radical reduction was worked, understanding then discourse would be deepened. If we understanding was deepened, then discourse would be deepened, and that because the whole thing was that if we via Carnap and other radical reductionists of the late 20s, early 30s, was that if we do well, if we can create a huge system on the conceptual side, then we will have available evidence for the doctrinal side. So, 2 cardinal tenets of epistemology. Whatever evidence there is for science is sensory evidence. Number 2, the inculcation of meanings of words must rest on sensory evidence. Carnap seeked out a rational reconstruction. Now, Russell discussed that before too. And he Quine in this article is looking at how the reductionism of the logical positivist period is despaired, and we can no longer really do it because it has failed. And how we really have failed to bring about a connection between the sensory observational world and our natural knowledge. So he starts to think about epistemology as being a chapter of psychology or a chapter of empirical science. That sensory stimulation is all we have to go on. Deducing science from observation is no easy matter, and it has failed many, many times. And the reason, from Carnap's Aufbau we had a radical reductionism. We were term by term translating. As time passed, they realized that this wasn't working. So they moved to a sentence by sentence translation and a more vague translations. And in 49 or 48, it was on its way out, but people like Ayer had this idea of a cash value translation, which is even more vague. They were still trying to hold on to this and trying to save it, but it wasn't working, and it failed, ultimately. Deductive science versus inductive science. That brings up the question between Popper, is science inductive, thus is it by observation and verification, or is it deductive, which is by falsification and corroboration? So the goal of these people was to translate sentences of science into sentences of observation, logic, and set theory. Carnap's Aufbau failed at this. Quine says that we must despair of any such reduction. Now, Carnap's empiricism, semantics, and ontology is a lot of what Quine is responding to in this article, as well as more so his two dogmas of empiricism. Such reductionism doesn't achieve its goal, but it conceptualizes something new. Rational or radical reductionism, term by term, failed and went to a sentence by sentence to a cash value, and finally abandoning the whole thing because it didn't work. Such reduction would have been by elimination if it succeeded. So that's why we have legitimation by elimination. So if this had worked, it would have been by that, and it would not have even been that successful had it even worked out. Reduction created fictitious structures, and didn't create a connection between observation and natural knowledge or scientific knowledge. So it kind of fictionalized something different than what they wanted in the first place, and that's part of why it failed and people didn't really work on it anymore. Quine says that psychology could have done this better, and reductivist translation not working out, then the conceptual project fails. So the link, therefore, between observation and natural knowledge or scientific knowledge is not accessible. So hopefully you're seeing all the problems that we have here between the whole goal that they had, that the Vienna Circle had, and the logical positivists had, that they wanted to kind of create this link, this infallible, indestructible link between knowledge and observation. What that did is it created something new. Then they wanted it didn't really do that job, and it had it succeeded, it would have been at a very low level, and it would not have worked that well. So keep in mind that Quine was a coherentist. The foundationists before him wanted to make observation the foundation of all knowledge. Quine is a coherentist in that he believes that knowledge is had by a coherence of beliefs in a coherent system, and that they dovetail and work together, and that's how we have justification and even possibly knowledge. So you can see, and I guess I pretty much agree with him that a indubitable connection between observation and knowledge is not really gettable. You can't access that if there is one, anyways. And I still think that science should be done by observational data. I personally am a falsificationist when it comes to philosophy of science and epistemology, and I have made videos on this, and I have written papers on this. And I think that observation should still be a starting point for science. We shouldn't remove observation altogether, but we can't ever have a indubitable connection between our hypotheses and predictions and theories and laws that we get at the end to what we started with in observation. So we have this, and it is inaccessible because statements about bodies and physical things are too complex for finite axiomatization. That's one thing that could have been that could be, but Quine says no. We do not know how we verifiably don't know how we verifiably make predictions that succeed. We don't know how a prediction is made that does well, or what a prediction is that does well. And it's kind of, I wanted to include here, he doesn't really discuss this too much, but it's called the Duhem-Quine thesis of the philosophy of science. People like Schlick would be inclined to test a certain hypothesis by itself and in isolation, where the Duhem-Quine thesis, he does discuss this a little, but it's that we have to test any one given hypothesis as along with its background assumptions and its background hypotheses in the system that it's in, and that is how we can avoid problems in the philosophy of science, which is called underdetermination and other issues like that, and we can kind of do that better. But then verification and verifiability doesn't work that way. And such considerations of doing that in this way of verification raises issues about translation between unphilosophical language about, like from English to Chinese. Pierre Duhem said that theoretical sentences have evidence in large blocks of theory, as opposed to single little parts. Most sentences are theoretical, except for the observational ones, and then we come to this another issue in the philosophy of science, which is the theoretical observational distinction of statements real, or is it a phony kind of distinction to be made? That's another issue, but he does bring this up a little bit. Not all can be translated into logical metatheoria, mathematical, and observational terms. So things don't work this way. We cannot access that link, and this translation doesn't really work out because we can't translate everything into terms of logic, mathematics, and set theory, and it's just that it's not a very doable endeavor, as epistemologists now realize. Epistemology minus metaphysics and minus reductionism is a chapter of psychology and thus natural science. So, having taken out metaphysics, which they did back then, way back when, and now taking out the reductionism, it's a chapter of psychology and thus a chapter of natural science, and as it studies the natural phenomena of the human subject. Thus, epistemology still goes on, but has this kind of new thing. Rational reconstruction by looking at psychological processes. We're doing a empirical psychology, and because having taken out this reductionism, this hope of doing it this way, doing it the way of trying to make this link via the conceptual project, trying to make a link between observation and natural science, which we realize now that it doesn't really work out so peachy. And taking that out and taking metaphysics out, we are just studying. We are studying phenomena of the mind. We are studying how. We are studying phenomena of the mind. We are studying how we see things and know things, and that's kind of what psychology is. So, what is the old way of epistemology? Now that's to construct natural science from sense data, to try to reduce all of, to reduce the thing language to the sense data language, and try to go from that into a natural science that we know is verified and confirmed. The new way of epistemology is contained in natural science as a chapter of psychology, which studies how the human subject posits bodies and entities from his data. So, the way I see it here is that you have two options. You could be a falsificationist, foundationalist, or you could be a coherentist like Duhem and Quine. Given this, anyways, since the verification, confirmation, radical or not radical reductionism has been thrown out, you can be a falsificationist and still be a foundationalist, or you could be a coherentist like Duhem and Quine. I personally would choose the route of being a foundationalist like Popper and Miller. Miller is a person who kind of talks about the problem of verisimilitude in the 70s and 80s and 90s. So, is this whole thing circular of having epistemology contained as a chapter of psychology and natural science? Is this a circular thing? No. According to him, anyways. So, epistemology is science, and in a way it kind of goes in a circle, but it's not epistemology being reduced to science, but it does kind of work in a circular fashion, but it is not circular in that one is contained in the other. So what are the conceptual and doctrinal projects? That kind of boils down to it kind of boils down to analyticity and meaning itself. In his two dogmas of empiricism, he kind of rejects reductionism, which he also does here, and rejects analyticity because they are kind of one and the same in that they both are based on meaning. And since he can't really pin down what meaning is, he rejects it and rejects analyticity and reductionism. So, what goes into understanding the meaning of a sentence is the conceptual project, and what goes beyond it, which is the doctrinal. Quine rejects, of course, as we know, the analytic-synthetic distinction. So what does this mean for the conceptual and doctrinal projects? It doesn't really work like that anymore, because Quine has his coherentism via what is called the web of belief, which I will explain to you in a second. Because of the fact, and about the conceptual and doctrinal projects, because he rejects analyticity and kind of doesn't really think of meaning as being a reliable notion, we can't really do epistemology via the conceptual and the doctrinal projects anymore via this epistemology as a chapter of psychology or empirical science. So Quine coherentism, we have the web of belief, which I will explain, in the community of people verifying what you think has its importance. So the people around you, which you talk to, say you saw a pink unicorn, and they say, well, you're nuts, and you kind of having everybody say that you were nuts, given what you've said, that has power and that has importance. The intersubjective tribunal of scientific hypotheses. So we still have use of observation sentences or protocol sentences via that. The ones we all have our protocol sentences or we all have our observational sentences, and if the intersubjective tribunal of scientific hypotheses or the community rejects a few of them, then you kind of have some obligation to either revise or throw those out. The idea of observation as impractical and objective science of evidence for science is bankrupt. The idea of observation as impractical and the objective source of evidence for science is bankrupt. So we don't have this objective evidence that we can look at for science because we haven't been able to further any kind of project for doing that. So we can't really. First of all, we have to, like we've discussed here, we have to reject the link between observation and natural and scientific knowledge that the positivists have been looking for. We have to despair of that project, and we also have to despair of any objective evidence there for us for science. So the then observation sentences are basic to both the conceptual and the doctrinal projects. So there's 3 sections here. 1, 2, and 3. The middle is logic and mathematics, therefore it is the theoretical. The outside is observation sentences, and therefore it is the observational. The inner part is theory and hypotheses. And when Carnap and Schlick and Neurath were kind of arguing back and forth as to whether observation I'm gonna let that ring and I'll talk. God damn it. Sorry. Okay, we're good. With Carnap and Neurath and Schlick, a lot of the debate was whether we could whether we could revise and recant and trash our protocol sentences or our observation sentences. Carnap at first said that we couldn't. Neurath said we could, and Schlick at first said that we couldn't, and it kind of ended up by 1950 and following towards Quine was that we can't was that we can revise those. We can revise or recant a observation statement because of the community saying otherwise. Any one of these can be revised or thrown out because of his coherentism, but it all working together is what makes it a good model. No one thing here is prior to another, and it's the web of belief, where if we have a problem with one thing or another, we first try to revise or throw out something in the middle. However, if that doesn't work, we can either go to the middle, the logic and mathematics, the theoretical part, or we can go to the outside. We just do whatever we can to make it all cohere and dovetail. And I do have a video which is just about Quine's web of belief that I made last summer, if you want more into that. The predicament of the indeterminacy of translation between has the predicament of indeterminacy of translation has no bearing on observation sentences. In epistemology, is there still semantics? Yes, because the evidence still has to do with linguistics. So this is a lot of which of this is a big history of epistemology. And I know I've been going for 40 minutes here, and I apologize for that. But the whole thing here, it's almost setting a precedent for epistemology following him. And I think this is a great thing to read. This is also a great book to look at and read, because Quine is just one of the best philosophers ever. So if you think I've messed something up with this article or left something out that I should have discussed, or anything you want to discuss, or if you have a question, comment below. I would love to discuss with you. And thank you very much.